Have you ever wondered what would happen if one moment of honesty could change two lives forever? What if a simple act of integrity could melt the coldest heart and transform the most ruthless businessman into someone capable of genuine human connection? This is exactly what happened when Maya Sullivan, a shy bookstore clerk struggling to make ends meet, accidentally scratched the pristine black Lamborghini belonging to Alexander Cross, the most feared CEO in the city. But instead of running away like anyone else would, she did something that would leave him completely speechless and desperate to find her. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 hours, turning the streets of downtown Seattle into a maze of reflecting puddles and slick pavement. Maya Sullivan clutched her worn canvas bag closer to her chest as she hurried down Pine Street, her sneakers splashing through shallow pools that had formed along the uneven sidewalk. The weight of her textbooks pressed against her ribs, a constant reminder of the evening classes she was taking to finish her delayed college degree. At 24, she felt like she was perpetually catching up to a life that had moved forward without her permission. The vintage bookstore where she worked barely provided enough income to cover her tiny studio apartment, but Maya treasured the quiet sanctuary it offered. Between the dusty shelves and the smell of aged paper, she could disappear into worlds where shy girls like herself became heroines, where courage came naturally, and where happy endings were just fantasies. Real life, however, had taught her different lessons. Her father had abandoned their family when she was 12, leaving behind nothing but empty promises and unpaid bills. Her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, sacrificing her health until exhaustion finally claimed her 2 years ago. Maya quickened her pace as the rain intensified, her eyes focused on the familiar green awning of Morrison's books just 2 blocks ahead. She had promised Mr. Morrison she would help him reorganize the inventory system, a task that would earn her an extra $50, money she desperately needed for next month's rent. The elderly bookstore owner had become something of a father figure to her, offering wisdom wrapped in gentle observations about the books people chose and the stories they sought. As she rounded the corner onto 4th Avenue, Maya noticed the sleek black sports car parked along the curb. Even through the rain-streaked streetlights, the vehicle seemed to gleam with an otherworldly perfection. Its curves were so precise, so flawless, that it looked more like a sculpture than a machine designed for driving. She had never seen anything quite like it in person, and despite her hurry, she found herself slowing down to admire its beauty. The Lamborghini Huracan sat like a predator at rest, its low profile and aggressive angles speaking of power and luxury that existed in a realm far beyond Maya's everyday experience. The rain beaded on its surface and rolled off like liquid mercury, as if even the weather knew better than to leave permanent marks on something so valuable. Maya estimated that the car probably cost more than she would earn in 5 years, maybe 10. It belonged to a world of private jets and penthouse apartments, of people who never worried about choosing between groceries and textbooks. She was so absorbed in studying the vehicle that she didn't notice how close she had drifted to the edge of the sidewalk. Her bag, heavy with books and papers, had shifted during her walk, and she paused to adjust the strap that was cutting into her shoulder. As she swung the bag around to redistribute the weight, disaster struck in the span of a heartbeat. The middle corner of her laptop, which she had tucked into the bag's side pocket for protection from the rain, caught the edge of the car's pristine paint job. The sound was barely audible above the rainfall, just a small scraping noise that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Maya heard it with the clarity of a church bell, and her heart immediately plummeted into her stomach. She stood frozen for several seconds, rain streaming down her face as she stared at the thin white line that now marred the car's perfect black surface. The scratch wasn't large, perhaps 3 inches long and barely visible unless you knew where to look. But on a vehicle this expensive, Maya knew that even minor damage would cost hundreds, possibly thousands of dollars to repair properly. Her first instinct was the same as most people would have, to look around quickly, make sure no one had witnessed the accident, and walk away as fast as possible. The street was relatively empty, with only a few pedestrians hurrying past under umbrellas, their faces hidden and their attention focused on escaping the weather. The car's owner was nowhere to be seen, probably inside one of the upscale restaurants or boutiques that lined this particular stretch of downtown. Maya could easily disappear into the crowd, and no one would ever know she was responsible for the damage. The scratch was so small that the owner might not even notice it for days, and by then, it could have been caused by anything, anyone. She took a step backward, already formulating the rationalization in her mind. She was a struggling student, working minimum wage jobs to survive. Whoever owned this car clearly had money to burn and probably wouldn't even miss the cost of repairs. But as she stood there in the rain, something her mother used to say echoed in her memory. Maya, darling, integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when you're all alone and no one would ever know the difference. Her mother had lived by those words, working honest jobs and treating people with respect even when they didn't return the favor. She had raised Maya to believe that character was measured not by wealth or success, but by the choices you made when faced with moral crossroads. The internal debate lasted only a few moments, but it felt like an eternity. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, the same one she used for jotting down book recommendations for customers at the store. Her hands trembled slightly as she tore out a clean page, partly from the cold rain, and partly from nervousness about what she was about to do. Finding a pen proved more challenging. She dug through her bag, pushing past textbooks and her lunch container until her fingers finally closed around a blue ballpoint pen that had seen better days. The ink came out unevenly, and she had to press hard to make the words visible on paper that was already beginning to absorb moisture from the rain. "Dear car owner," she began, then crossed it out. Too formal. She started again. "Hi. I'm really sorry, but I accidentally scratched your car with my bag. I know this is probably really expensive to fix. And I don't have much money, but I want to do the right thing. Please call me so we can figure out how to handle this. My name is Maya Sullivan, and my number is 206-555-0847. Again, I'm so sorry, Maya." She read the note 3 times, making sure her phone number was correct and that her handwriting was legible despite the challenging conditions. The paper was starting to disintegrate slightly at the edges where the rain had soaked through, but the essential information remained clear. Maya folded the note carefully and looked around for a way to secure it to the car without causing additional damage. The windshield wipers seemed like the safest option. She lifted one gently and slipped the folded paper underneath, positioning it so that the driver would definitely notice it, but ensuring it wouldn't blow away in the wind. The white paper stood out starkly against the black paint, like a flag of surrender or a beacon of honesty in a world that rarely rewarded such gestures. As she stepped back to make sure the note was secure, Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. There was fear, certainly, about the financial implications of what she had just committed to. Her monthly budget was stretched so thin that an unexpected expense of any significant size could force her to make impossible choices between school and survival. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something that felt almost like relief. She had done the right thing. Whatever consequences followed, she would face them with a clear conscience. Her mother would have been proud, and that knowledge provided a small measure of comfort as Maya hurried away from the scene, her sneakers splashing through puddles as she finally continued toward the bookstore. The rain continued to fall as she disappeared around the corner, leading to pristine Lamborghini alone under the streetlight with its small battle scar and its unexpected gift of honesty tucked beneath the windshield wiper. Alexander Cross emerged from the steel and glass tower that housed the headquarters of Cross Industries at exactly 7:30 p.m., the same time he had been leaving the office for the past 8 years. Punctuality was more than a habit for him. It was a religion, a way of imposing order on a world that he controlled through sheer force of will and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. At 32, Alexander had built his empire from the ground up, transforming a struggling family business into a multinational corporation worth billions. His success had come at a price that most people couldn't fathom. He hadn't taken a real vacation in over 5 years, hadn't been in a relationship that lasted longer than 3 months, and hadn't spoken to his estranged brother in almost 2 years. The pursuit of excellence and profit had consumed every aspect of his existence, leaving little room for the messy complications of human emotion. His employees respected him, his competitors feared him, and his business associates envied him. But Alexander couldn't remember the last time someone had genuinely liked him. He had cultivated his reputation as a cold, calculating businessman with the same precision he applied to quarterly reports and acquisition strategies. Emotion was a weakness, sentiment was a liability, and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford in a world where everyone seemed to want something from him. The rain had stopped by the time he reached his car, leaving the streets gleaming under the artificial glow of downtown Seattle's nighttime illumination. Alexander approached his Lamborghini with the same measured stride he used in boardroom negotiations, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the wet pavement with mechanical precision. The car was more than transportation. It was a statement, a symbol of what could be achieved through relentless ambition and unwavering focus. He was reaching for the door handle when he noticed the piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. Alexander's first reaction was irritation. Street vendors and club promoters were constantly leaving flyers on expensive cars, assuming that wealthy individuals were prime targets for their services. He had accumulated dozens of advertisements for exclusive restaurants, private parties, and luxury services over the years, most of which went directly into the nearest trash can without being read. But as he pulled the folded paper free, something about its texture and appearance gave him pause. This wasn't a professionally printed flyer or glossy advertisement. The paper was thin and slightly damp, torn from what looked like a student's notebook. The handwriting was feminine and careful, with the kind of deliberate penmanship that suggested someone who took time to craft their words thoughtfully. Alexander unfolded the note under the streetlight, his eyes scanning the brief message with growing astonishment. He read it once, then again, then a third time, each reading deepening his sense of disbelief. In a world where people regularly tried to defraud insurance companies, where hit-and-run accidents were commonplace, where most individuals would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid taking responsibility for their mistakes, someone had voluntarily confessed to causing damage and offered to make it right. He walked around his car slowly, searching for the scratch mentioned in the note. It took several minutes to locate the damage, a thin white line barely 3 inches long along the rear quarter panel. The mark was so small that Alexander might not have noticed it for weeks, if not for Maya's confession. In the grand scheme of automotive repairs, it was insignificant, probably less than $300 to fix properly. But the implications of the note were anything but insignificant. Alexander stood in the glow of the streetlight, holding the piece of notebook paper as if it were a historical artifact, something so rare and precious that it defied rational explanation. In his experience, people were motivated by self-interest, fear, or greed. Altruism was a fairy tale that parents told children, a naive concept that had no place in the real world of business and adult responsibility. Yet here was evidence that challenged everything he believed about human nature. Someone named Maya Sullivan had not only taken responsibility for a mistake that she could have easily hidden, but had also provided her contact information and expressed genuine remorse for the incident. Alexander found himself studying the handwriting, looking for clues about the person who had written it. The letters were neat but not perfect, suggesting someone who was careful but not obsessive. The tone was apologetic without being overly dramatic, honest without being self-serving. Alexander pulled out his phone and stared at the number Maya had provided. His finger hovered over the keypad as he debated whether to call immediately or wait until the following day. Business logic suggested waiting until normal hours, but something about the note had triggered a curiosity that felt almost urgent. He needed to understand what kind of person would do something like this, what motivated such an act of integrity in a world that rarely rewarded honesty. Instead of calling, Alexander found himself walking back toward the building, the note still clutched in his hand. He rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, past the executive offices and conference rooms, where he had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His corner office overlooked the city, providing a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, had never failed to remind him of how far he had climbed from his modest beginnings. Alexander sat behind his mahogany desk and placed the note carefully on the surface, smoothing out the wrinkles that had formed when it was folded. Under the bright fluorescent lights of his office, the paper looked even more humble, like something a child might use for a school assignment. The The contrast between this simple confession and the sophisticated contracts and financial documents that usually occupied his workspace was stark and somehow profound. He opened his laptop and began what he told himself was a routine background check, the same kind of research he would conduct on any potential business partner or employee. Maya Sullivan's name yielded surprisingly few results. She had a minimal social media presence, just a barely used Facebook account with privacy settings that revealed only her name, and a profile picture that showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, smiling shyly, at the camera. The public record search was more revealing. Maya Sullivan, age 24, currently employed at Morrison's Books on Pine Street. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants, no civil litigation history. Her credit report, which Alexander accessed through channels that were legally questionable but practically necessary in his line of work, showed the financial profile of someone living paycheck to paycheck. Student loans, a modest car payment, rent on what appeared to be a studio apartment in one of Seattle's less fashionable neighborhoods. The picture that emerged was of someone who had very little in terms of material wealth, but had still chosen to do the right thing when presented with a moral dilemma. Alexander found this combination fascinating and deeply puzzling. In his experience, people with limited resources were more likely to cut corners, not less. Desperation usually bred compromise, not integrity. As the night wore on, Alexander found himself unable to concentrate on the quarterly reports and merger documents that demanded his attention. He kept returning to the note, reading it again and again, as if it were written in a foreign language that he was slowly learning to decode. The phrase, "I want to do the right thing," particularly captivated him. When was the last time he had heard someone express that sentiment without any apparent ulterior motive? By midnight, Alexander had made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of handling this matter through his usual channels, delegating the task to an assistant or insurance representative, he would meet Maya Sullivan in person. He wanted to look into the eyes of someone who still believed that integrity mattered more than convenience, someone who was willing to accept responsibility, even when it would cost her money she clearly couldn't afford to lose. The decision felt impulsive and irrational, qualities that Alexander had spent years training himself to suppress. But something about Maya's note had awakened a curiosity that transcended his usual business calculations. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander Cross was genuinely interested in another human being, not for what they could do for him or how they might fit into his corporate strategy, but simply for who they were and what motivated them to act with such unexpected honor. He picked up his phone and dialed Maya's number, then hung up before it could ring. Tomorrow, he decided. He would call tomorrow and arrange to meet the woman who had reminded him that some people still believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. Maya had been working at Morrison's Books for almost 3 years, but she still felt a small thrill of contentment every time she unlocked the front door and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of literature and learning. The bookstore occupied the ground floor of a building that had been constructed in the 1920s, and it retained much of its original character, despite decades of urban development that had transformed the surrounding neighborhood into a mixture of trendy restaurants and corporate offices. The morning after the car incident, Maya arrived at work 30 minutes early, as was her habit. She used this quiet time to organize her thoughts, prepare for the day ahead, and sometimes steal a few moments with a book that had caught her attention. Mr. Morrison trusted her completely and had given her a set of keys shortly after her first month of employment, a gesture that had meant more to Maya than he probably realized. She was shelving a new shipment of contemporary fiction when her phone rang, the sound startling in the peaceful silence of the empty store. Maya glanced at the caller ID and didn't recognize the number, which immediately made her stomach clench with anxiety. Unknown calls usually meant collection agencies, medical bills, or other financial complications that she preferred to avoid until absolutely necessary. But as she stared at the phone, Maya remembered the note she had left on the expensive car the previous evening. This could be the call she had been both dreading and expecting, the moment when she would have to face the consequences of her honesty. Taking a deep breath, she answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, this is Maya," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss Sullivan, this is Alexander Cross. I believe you left a note on my car yesterday evening. The voice on the other end of the line was deep and controlled, with a kind of precise diction that suggested education and authority. Maya could hear the faint sounds of a busy office in the background, phones ringing and conversations taking place, creating an atmosphere of important business being conducted. "Oh, yes, hi," Maya stammered, suddenly feeling foolish for her informal greeting. "I'm really sorry about your car. I know the damage probably costs a lot to fix, and I want to make it right, but I have to be honest with you about my situation. I work part-time at a bookstore and I'm taking evening classes, so I don't have a lot of money right now. But I can set up a payment plan or work out some kind of arrangement." End quote. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, so long that Maya began to worry that the call had been disconnected. When Alexander finally spoke, his tone had shifted subtly, becoming less formal and more curious. "Miss Sullivan, I have to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Why did you leave the note? The scratch is barely visible, and you could have easily walked away without anyone knowing you were responsible." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks, even though there was no one in the bookstore to witness her embarrassment. The question seemed to probe deeper than the simple matter of automotive repair, as if this stranger was trying to understand something fundamental about her character. "I don't know," she said finally, which was both completely true and utterly inadequate as an explanation. "I mean, I guess I know it was the right thing to do. My mom always taught me that integrity matters, especially when no one else is watching. I couldn't just walk away and pretend it didn't happen." Another pause, shorter this time, but filled with what Maya interpreted as thoughtful consideration. "I'd like to meet with you," Alexander said, his words crisp and decisive. "Not to discuss payment, but because I'm curious about something. Would you be available for coffee sometime today?" Maya's first instinct was to decline. The man on the phone sounded important and intimidating, the kind of person who probably scheduled meetings weeks in advance and conducted business in expensive restaurants where she would feel completely out of place. But there was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't a typical business proposition, and her natural curiosity began to override her social anxiety. "I work until 6 today," she said hesitantly, "but I could meet after that if you want." "Perfect. Do you know Café Luna on 5th Avenue? It's quiet, good for conversation." Maya knew the place, had walked past it dozens of times, but never been inside. It was the kind of upscale coffee shop that served artisanal beverages with names she couldn't pronounce, and charged more for a single drink than she usually spent on food in an entire day. "Yes, I know where it is," she said. 7 o'clock then. I'll be at the table by the window. Miss Sullivan, thank you for your honesty yesterday. It's rarer than you might think." The line went dead, leaving Maya standing among the bookshelves with her phone still pressed to her ear and a dozen questions racing through her mind. The conversation had not gone at all as she had expected. Instead of anger or demands for immediate payment, she had encountered curiosity and what almost sounded like gratitude. The man's voice had been serious but not hostile, formal but not cold. Maya spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted anticipation, making small errors in customer transactions and losing her place while reading book descriptions aloud. Mr. Morrison, who had developed a fatherly concern for her well-being over the years, noticed her unusual behavior by mid-afternoon. "You seem preoccupied today, dear," he said during a lull between customers. "Everything all right at school?" Maya considered telling him about the car incident and the mysterious phone call, but something held her back. The situation felt too strange and uncertain to put into words, and she didn't want to worry the elderly man who had already shown her more kindness than she felt she deserved. "Just thinking about a paper I have to write," she said, which was technically true since she did have several assignments due in the coming weeks. As closing time approached, Maya found herself growing increasingly nervous about the upcoming meeting. She had no idea what to expect from Alexander Cross, or even what he looked like. His voice had suggested someone older, perhaps in his 40s or 50s, with the kind of professional bearing that came from years of conducting high-stakes business negotiations. At 6:15, Maya locked up the bookstore and hurried home to her studio apartment. She had 45 minutes to transform herself from a rumpled bookstore clerk into someone presentable enough for Café Luna, a challenge that felt almost insurmountable given her limited wardrobe and ease. non-existent makeup skills. She settled on a simple black sweater that she usually reserved for job interviews and her least faded pair of jeans, pairing them with the only shoes she owned that weren't sneakers or completely worn out. A quick brush through her hair and a touch of lip gloss completed her preparation, leaving her looking neat but hardly sophisticated. Maya arrived at the cafe exactly at 7 o'clock, her punctuality born from a lifetime of anxiety about being late and causing inconvenience to others. The interior of Café Luna was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls, comfortable leather chairs, and the kind of ambient lighting that made everyone look more attractive and mysterious. She scanned the room for someone who might be waiting for her, her eyes eventually settling on a man sitting alone at the corner table by the large front window. He was younger than she had expected, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and the kind of precise grooming that suggested both wealth and attention to detail. His suit was clearly expensive, tailored to fit perfectly, and he held himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being in control of every situation. But what struck Maya most were his eyes. They were intelligent and intense, the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything and miss nothing. As she approached his table, she felt as if she were being evaluated, studied with the same thoroughness that she might apply to a particularly complex piece of literature. Alexander Cross stood when he saw her approaching, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that surprised Maya and made her feel both welcomed and intimidated. He was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and the kind of physical presence that commanded attention even in a crowded room. "Miss Sullivan?" he said, extending his hand for a formal handshake. "Thank you for coming. I'm Alexander Cross." His grip was firm and confident, the handshake of someone who was used to making important first impressions. Maya felt small and insignificant in comparison, acutely aware of the difference in their respective stations in life. "Please, call me Maya," she said as they sat down. "And thank you for choosing somewhere nice to meet. I was worried you might want to discuss this at a police station or something." Alexander's expression shifted slightly, and Maya thought she detected the ghost of a smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. It was the first hint of warmth she had seen from him, and it made her feel marginally less nervous about the encounter. "No police stations," he said. "This is just a conversation between two people. Can I get you something to drink?" Maya glanced at the menu and felt a familiar pang of financial anxiety. Even the simplest coffee drinks were priced beyond her usual budget, and she didn't want to seem presumptuous by ordering something expensive when she wasn't sure who would be paying for it. "Just coffee black would be fine," she said. Alexander flagged down a server and ordered 2 coffees, then leaned back in his chair and studied Maya with the same intense attention she had noticed when she first approached the table. The scrutiny made her uncomfortable, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact, remembering her mother's advice that confidence was often a matter of acting confident until the feeling became genuine. "I have to admit," Alexander said after the server had delivered their drinks, "your note yesterday completely surprised me. In my experience, most people in your situation would have simply walked away and hoped for the second best." Maya wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, using the warmth to calm her nerves. "I thought about it," she admitted. "For a few seconds, I seriously considered just leaving. But I couldn't live with myself if I did that. It wouldn't have been right. Even though admitting fault would cost you money you probably can't afford to lose." The question was direct and somewhat personal, but Maya sensed that Alexander was genuinely trying to understand her motivation rather than judging her financial situation. "Especially then," she said. "I mean, if I had plenty of money, doing the right thing would be easy. It's when doing the right thing is hard that it really matters." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against the side of his coffee cup. Maya had the distinct impression that she had said something that challenged his worldview in a fundamental way, something that required serious consideration. "Tell me about yourself," he said finally. "What do you do besides work at the bookstore?" Maya found herself relaxing slightly as the conversation shifted to safer, more familiar territory. She told him about her evening classes, her goal of finishing her degree in literature, and her love of books that had led her to Morrison's in the first place. Alexander listened with the kind of focused attention that made her feel as if her words were genuinely important to him. As the conversation continued, Maya began to notice subtle changes in Alexander's demeanor. His posture became less rigid, his questions more personal and less interrogatory. He asked about her favorite books, her career aspirations, and her thoughts on various authors, with the enthusiasm of someone who was genuinely interested in her opinions, rather than simply making polite conversation. "You mentioned your mother," Alexander said during a lull in their discussion. "Is she the one who taught you about integrity?" Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest that always accompanied thoughts of her mother. "She died 2 years ago," she said quietly. "Cancer. But yes, she was the one who taught me that how you treat people and the choices you make when no one is watching define who you really are." "I'm sorry for your loss," Alexander said, and Maya could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. She worked 3 jobs to support us after my dad left, and she never complained. Never made me feel like I was a burden. She always said that being poor didn't mean you had to be small, that integrity and kindness were the only wealth that really mattered." Maya realized that she had revealed more about herself in the past hour than she typically shared with people she had known for months. There was something about Alexander's attention, his way of asking questions and listening to the answers, that made her want to open up despite her natural tendency toward privacy. "Your mother was right about integrity," Alexander said. "It's the rarest quality I've encountered in business, or in life generally. Most people I deal with are motivated by profit, status, or fear. Finding someone who acts purely out of principle is, well, it's extraordinary." Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks again, embarrassed by the praise but also touched by his words. "I'm not extraordinary," she said. "I'm just trying to get by like everyone else." "That's where you're wrong," Alexander said, and for the first time since they had sat down, his voice carried a warmth that transformed his entire presence. "What you did yesterday, leaving that note, it restored something I had forgotten existed. It reminded me that some people still believe in doing the right thing, even when it costs them something." The conversation continued for another hour, ranging across topics that neither of them had expected to discuss with a stranger. Alexander found himself talking about his business, his philosophy of leadership, and his growing sense of isolation from genuine human connection. Maya shared her dreams of maybe opening her own bookstore someday, her love of poetry, and her struggle to balance work and school while maintaining some semblance of a social life. As the evening wore on, something remarkable happened. Alexander Cross, the man who had built his reputation on emotional detachment and calculated decision-making, found himself genuinely laughing at Maya's stories about difficult customers at the bookstore. The sound surprised him, a spontaneous expression of joy that he hadn't experienced in longer than he could remember. Maya, for her part, discovered that beneath Alexander's intimidating exterior was a person capable of genuine curiosity and unexpected kindness. His questions about her life weren't the polite inquiries of someone making conversation, but the engaged interest of someone who found her experiences and perspectives genuinely valuable. When Alexander finally glanced at his watch, he was shocked to discover that nearly 3 hours had passed. Time had seemed to move differently during their conversation, flowing at the pace of genuine connection rather than the mechanical rhythm of scheduled appointments and business obligations. "I should probably let you get home," he said reluctantly. "But before you go, I want to address the matter of the car repair." Maya tensed, the reminder of the original purpose of their meeting bringing her back to the reality of her financial situation. "Right, of course. Like I said, I can set up a payment plan or work something out." Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to her. "The damage to my car is minimal, probably less than $300 to fix properly. But that's not what this is about anymore." Maya looked at the card, which bore the elegant logo of Cross Industries and Alexander's name, with the title Chief Executive Officer printed beneath it. On the back, he had written what appeared to be a much larger number, followed by his personal phone number. "I don't understand," she said, staring at the figure he had written. "That's what I'm offering you," Alexander said. "Not as payment for damages, but as a thank you for reminding me that integrity still exists in the world. Consider it a scholarship fund. Or startup capital for that bookstore you mentioned. Or just a recognition that honesty should be rewarded rather than penalized." End quote. Maya stared at the number, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. It was more money than she had ever imagined having at one time, enough to pay off her student loans, cover her living expenses for the next 2 years, and still have enough left over to seriously consider opening her own business. "I can't accept this," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It's too much. I just left a note on your car." "You did much more than that," Alexander said. "You reminded me what it feels like to have faith in another person. You showed me that not everyone in the world is motivated by self-interest and calculation. That's worth far more than what I'm offering you." Maya looked up from the card to find Alexander watching her with an expression that was completely different from the controlled, business-like demeanor he had displayed when she first arrived. His eyes held warmth, and something that looked almost like gratitude, as if she had given him a gift rather than damaged his property. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll use it to do something meaningful," Alexander replied. "Say you'll continue being the kind of person who leaves honest notes on strangers' cars. Say you'll have dinner with me tomorrow night so we can continue this conversation." The last part of his request caught Maya completely off guard. Throughout their evening together, she had sensed a growing connection between them, but she hadn't dared to imagine that someone like Alexander Cross would be interested in pursuing a relationship with someone like her. "You want to have dinner with me?" she asked, needing confirmation that she had heard him correctly. "Very much," Alexander said, and when he smiled, really smiled for the first time all evening, Maya felt something shift in her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee, and everything to do with the possibility that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible, but filled with anticipation. "I'd like that." As they stood to leave the cafe, Alexander offered Maya his arm, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly natural. Walking beside him toward the street, Maya couldn't help but think about the series of small decisions that had led to this moment. The choice to take responsibility for her mistake, the decision to be honest when dishonesty would have been easier, the courage to meet a stranger for coffee despite her natural shyness. Alexander, meanwhile, found himself experiencing emotions that he had spent years suppressing in the name of business efficiency and professional success. The simple pleasure of genuine conversation, the warmth of connecting with another person without ulterior motives, the surprising joy of making someone smile. As they reached the sidewalk and prepared to part ways, he realized that for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was looking forward to tomorrow, not because of a business deal or corporate milestone, but because he would see Maya again. "Thank you," he said, as they stood under the streetlight outside the cafe, "for being exactly who you are." Maya smiled up at him, no longer intimidated by his success or sophistute appearance. She had seen beneath the surface to the man who was capable of kindness, who valued integrity above profit, and who had somehow found in her simple act of honesty something worth celebrating. "Thank you," she replied, "for making me believe that doing the right thing sometimes really does matter." As Maya walked home through the quiet streets of downtown Seattle, she clutched Alexander's business card in her hand like a talisman, occasionally glancing at the number he had written on the back to convince herself that the entire evening hadn't been an elaborate dream. The amount was life-changing, the more than the money. It was the way Alexander had looked at her when he offered it that lingered in her mind. There had been something almost vulnerable in his expression, as if her acceptance of his generosity mattered to him on a level that transcended the transaction itself. The next morning brought a sense of unreality that Maya struggled to shake as she went through her usual routine of opening Morrison's books. Everything looked the same, the familiar shelves and reading nooks that had been her sanctuary for 3 years, but she felt fundamentally different, as if the conversation with Alexander had awakened possibilities that she had never allowed herself to consider. Mr. Morrison arrived at his usual time, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street, a small ritual that had developed between them over the months. He was in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of book lovers come and go through his store. Maya had often wondered what kept him in the business when larger chains and online retailers were making independent bookstores increasingly rare, but she had never found the courage to ask directly. "You seem different today, dear," he observed as he handed her one of the coffee cups. "There's something about your posture, the way you're carrying yourself. Did something happen?" Maya considered how much to reveal about her encounter with Alexander, weighing her natural tendency toward privacy against her growing excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead. Mr. Morrison had been more than an employer to her. He had been a mentor and father figure, offering wisdom and support during some of her most difficult moments. "I met someone last night," she said finally. "Someone who might be able to help me with school, maybe even with some bigger dreams I've been afraid to think about seriously." Mr. Morrison's eyes sparkled with interest and concern in equal measure. He had developed a protective fondness for Maya over the years, recognizing in her the same love of literature and learning that had sustained him through decades of financial uncertainty in the book business. "Tell me about this someone," he said, settling into his favorite chair behind the counter. "Is this a romantic interest or something more business-oriented?" Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks as she considered the question. Her connection with Alexander had elements of both professional opportunity and personal attraction, though she wasn't sure how to categorize what was developing between them. "Both, maybe," she admitted. "He's older, successful, and he seems genuinely interested in helping me pursue my goals. But there's also something else, something I can't quite define yet." They were interrupted by the arrival of the morning's first customers, a young couple looking for wedding planning books, which gave Maya time to think about how to explain her situation without revealing too many details. As she helped the couple find what they needed, she found herself wondering what Alexander was doing at that moment, whether he was thinking about their dinner plans or if he had already moved on to more pressing business concerns. The day passed slowly, punctuated by Maya's frequent glances at her phone and periodic checks of Alexander's business card to make sure she hadn't imagined the previous evening's encounter. Around 3 o'clock, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number that she immediately recognized as Alexander's. "Looking forward to dinner tonight. I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of making reservations at Canley's. Pick you up at 7, eh?" Maya stared at the message, her heart racing as she processed the implications. Canley's was one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, the kind of place where reservations were made weeks in advance, and meals cost more than Maya typically spent on food in an entire month. The idea of dining there with Alexander Cross felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in movies or romance novels. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple and honest. "That sounds wonderful, but I should probably mention that I've never been anywhere quite so fancy. I hope I don't embarrass you." Alexander's response came back within minutes. "Impossible. See you at 7. The simple confidence of his reply did nothing to calm Maya's growing anxiety about the evening ahead. She spent the remainder of her shift at the bookstore, mentally cataloging her wardrobe and trying to remember everything she had ever read about proper dining etiquette at upscale restaurants. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she was in a state of barely controlled panic about making a good impression. Mr. Morrison noticed her distress as she prepared to leave for the day. "Maya, dear, whatever fancy place this gentleman is taking you, remember that he asked you to dinner because of who you are, not because of what you're wearing or how perfectly you handle the silverware. Be yourself, and if he doesn't appreciate that, then he's not worth your time." His words provided some comfort as Maya hurried home to prepare for what felt like the most important evening of her life. She settled on the same black sweater she had worn to the cafe, paired with her best skirt and the low heels she reserved for special occasions. A touch of makeup and careful attention to her hair completed her preparation, leaving her looking polished but still recognizably herself. Alexander arrived at her apartment building at exactly 7 o'clock, punctuality that Maya was beginning to recognize as one of his defining characteristics. He was waiting beside a sleek black sedan, not the Lamborghini she had damaged, wearing a dark suit that emphasized his tall frame and confident bearing. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile that made Maya's anxiety dissolve into anticipation. "You look beautiful," he said as he opened the car door for her. the compliment delivered with such sincerity that Maya found herself believing it might actually be true. The drive to Canlis took them through some of Seattle's most scenic neighborhoods, winding up Queen Anne Hill toward the restaurant's iconic location overlooking Lake Union. Alexander kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking about her day at the bookstore and sharing amusing anecdotes about his own work challenges. His manner relaxed and engaging, rather than the formal businessman she had initially expected him to be. Canlis itself exceeded even Maya's elevated expectations. The restaurant occupied a mid-century modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the water and city skyline. The interior was elegant without being ostentatious, with warm wood tones and sophisticated lighting that created an atmosphere of intimate luxury. Their table was positioned to maximize the view, and Maya found herself momentarily speechless as she took in the panorama of lights beginning to twinkle across the city as evening settled over Seattle. Alexander watched her reaction with obvious pleasure, clearly enjoying her genuine appreciation for the experience he was providing. "This is incredible," Maya said as they settled into their seats. "I had no idea places like this actually existed outside of movies." "I'm glad you like it," Alexander replied. "I wanted our first real dinner together to be memorable." The phrase, "first real dinner," carried implications that sent a flutter of excitement through Maya's chest. Alexander was already thinking beyond this single evening, planning for a future that included more shared experiences and deeper connection. Their server approached with menus and wine recommendations, speaking in the practiced tones of someone accustomed to serving Seattle's business and social elite. Maya felt momentarily overwhelmed by the number of courses and unfamiliar ingredients listed on the menu, but Alexander guided her through the options with patient explanation and gentle suggestions. "Trust me?" he asked, as he discussed wine pairings with the sommelier, and Maya nodded, realizing that trust was exactly what she was prepared to offer this man who had already shown her more kindness than she had experienced in years. As the evening progressed through multiple courses of exquisitely prepared cuisine, Maya found herself relaxing into the luxury and sophistication that surrounded them. More importantly, she discovered that Alexander was even more interesting and complex than their cafe conversation had revealed. He spoke passionately about literature, having been an English major in college, before business school redirected his career path. He asked thoughtful questions about her studies and dreams, listening to her answers with the kind of focused attention that made her feel valued and respected. "I have a confession to make," Alexander said, as they shared a dessert that was more art installation than food. "Yesterday, after I found your note, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I must have read it 50 times, trying to understand what kind of person would do something like that." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Maya asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "That I wanted to know you," Alexander said simply. "Not just meet you, but really know you. Understand what shaped you into someone who still believes in doing the right thing, even when it costs you something." Maya set down her fork, meeting Alexander's intense gaze across the table. "Can I ask you something? Why does my honesty matter so much to you? I mean, you're obviously successful. You must deal with honest people in your business all the time." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently turning his wineglass as he considered how to answer. "Actually, I don't," he said finally. "In my world, everyone wants something. Every conversation has an agenda. Every relationship has a transactional element. People tell me what they think I want to hear, or what serves their own interests. Your note was the first completely honest communication I've received in longer than I can remember." "That sounds lonely," Maya said softly. "It is," Alexander admitted, the vulnerability in his voice catching them both by surprise. "I built my success by being smarter, more ruthless, and less trusting than everyone around me. It worked, but somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to connect with people on a genuine level, until yesterday, when a shy bookstore clerk reminded me what integrity looks like." End quote. Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes as she heard the loneliness and regret in Alexander's voice. Despite his wealth and success, he had paid a price for his achievements that she was only beginning to understand. "You don't have to be alone," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Maybe you just need to remember how to trust people again." Alexander looked down at her small hand covering his, feeling something crack open inside his chest, some wall that he had built to protect himself from disappointment and betrayal. Maya's touch was gentle but certain, offering comfort without asking for anything in return. "I'd like to try," he said, turning his hand over to intertwine their fingers. "With you, if you're willing to be patient with someone who's forgotten how to do this." The remainder of dinner passed in a blur of deepening conversation and growing connection. Alexander shared stories about his childhood, his complicated relationship with his family, and his fear that success had cost him the ability to form meaningful relationships. Maya talked about her dreams for the future, her struggles with self-confidence, and her determination to honor her mother's memory by living with integrity and purpose. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Alexander hesitated at the entrance, seeming reluctant to end the evening. "Would you like to take a walk? It's a beautiful night, and I'm not quite ready to say goodbye yet." Maya nodded, equally unwilling to return to the ordinary world after the magical evening they had shared. They walked slowly through the nearby residential streets, their conversation continuing under the soft glow of streetlights and the emerging stars. "Maya," Alexander said, as they paused at a viewpoint overlooking the city, "I want you to know that tonight has been one of the best evenings I've had in years. You make me remember what it feels like to enjoy someone's company without calculating what I might gain from the interaction." Sas. Maya turned to face him, struck by the sincerity in his voice and the warmth in his eyes. "You make me feel like my thoughts and opinions actually matter to someone," she replied. "Like I'm worth listening to, worth spending time with." They stood close together in the cool night air, the city lights twinkling below them like earthbound stars. Alexander reached up to brush a strand of hair from Maya's face, his touch gentle and reverent. "You are worth so much more than you realize," he said softly. "Your kindness, your integrity, your genuine care for others. Those are the rarest and most valuable qualities a person can possess." Maya felt her heart racing as Alexander's hand lingered against her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with infinite tenderness. She had never been looked at the way Alexander was looking at her, with a mixture of admiration, affection, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. "Alexander," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say, but needing to voice the emotions that were building inside her chest. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Maya found herself rising on her toes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was soft and tentative, a question asked and answered in the gentle pressure of lips meeting under the star-filled sky. When they finally separated, Alexander rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing deeply as they processed the magnitude of what was happening between them. "I don't want this night to end," he murmured. "It doesn't have to," Maya replied, her natural shyness overcome by the strength of her feelings for this man who had seen something valuable in her simple act of honesty. They walked back to Alexander's car hand in hand, both of them understanding that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. What had begun as a meeting to discuss car repairs had evolved into something far more significant, a connection that promised to transform both of their lives in ways they were only beginning to imagine. As Alexander drove Maya home, she found herself thinking about the series of small choices that had led to this moment. The decision to leave an honest note, the courage to meet a stranger for coffee, the willingness to trust someone who operated in a world far removed from her own experience. Each choice had built upon the previous one, creating a path toward a future that she could never have envisioned just 2 days earlier. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Alexander asked as he walked her to the entrance of her apartment building. "If you want to," Maya replied, still hardly able to believe that someone like Alexander Cross would want to spend consecutive evenings with someone like her. "I want to see you tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day for as long as you'll have me," Alexander said, his honesty matching the vulnerability she had shown him from the very beginning. Maya smiled up at him, no longer intimidated by his success or sophistication, but seeing instead the man who had been searching for genuine connection and had found it in the most unexpected place. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him goodnight, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier, but now felt as natural as breathing. As Alexander drove away, Maya stood on the sidewalk watching his taillights disappear into the Seattle traffic, her hand pressed to her lips where she could still feel the warmth of his kiss. Above her, the same stars that had witnessed their first tender moment continued to shine, silent guardians of a love story that had begun with nothing more than an honest note left on a stranger's car. The following weeks unfolded like chapters in a fairy tale that Maya had never dared to dream for herself. Alexander proved to be as attentive and thoughtful in his courtship as he was precise in his business dealings. But with Maya, his gestures came from a place of genuine affection rather than calculated strategy. He sent flowers to the bookstore with handwritten notes that made Maya blush and smile in equal measure. He appeared at closing time with suggestions for dinner at new restaurants, always choosing places where they could talk without interruption, always more interested in her thoughts and experiences than in impressing her with expensive venues. Most surprisingly, Alexander began visiting Morrison's books during his lunch breaks, browsing the shelves with the enthusiasm of someone rediscovering a long-lost passion. He purchased books on poetry and contemporary fiction, subjects that had nothing to do with quarterly reports or market analysis, and engaged Maya in discussions about authors and themes with the intellectual curiosity that had originally drawn into literature years earlier. Mr. Morrison watched these developments with the pleased expression of someone who had suspected from the beginning that Maya's mysterious gentleman caller was something special. He observed the way Alexander looked at Maya when she was helping other customers, the way his entire demeanor softened when she entered the room, the way he listened to her opinions about books as if she were a respected literary critic rather than a part-time clerk. "That young man is quite taken with you," Mr. Morrison commented one afternoon after Alexander had left with a collection of poetry that Maya had recommended. "I've seen a lot of people in love over the years, and he has all the symptoms." Maya felt her cheeks warm at the word love, though she had begun to suspect that what was developing between her and Alexander might indeed be heading in that direction. She had certainly never felt anything like the combination of excitement, comfort, and deep affection that filled her whenever she was with him. "Do you think it's possible for two people from such different backgrounds to really make it work?" she asked Mr. Morrison, voicing the concern that sometimes kept her awake at night. "Maya, dear," the elderly man said with the wisdom of someone who had observed human nature for 7 decades. "Love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. What matters is whether two people bring out the best in each other, whether they make each other want to be better versions of themselves. From what I've seen, you and Alexander do exactly that." His words proved prophetic as Maya continued to witness the subtle changes in Alexander's personality and priorities. The man who had built his reputation on emotional detachment and ruthless business practices began to show signs of the warmth and humanity that had been buried beneath years of corporate armor. Alexander, for his part, found himself making decisions that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. He began leaving the office at reasonable hours, delegating responsibilities to trusted employees instead of micromanaging every detail himself. He started a charitable foundation focused on supporting literacy programs and independent bookstores, inspired by Maya's passion for literature and her stories about struggling readers who found sanctuary in places like Morrison's. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable, visible to everyone who worked with Alexander and knew his history of single-minded focus on profit and efficiency. His assistant, Sarah, who had worked for him for 5 years, commented to her husband that Mr. Cross seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight he had been carrying for years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. One evening in late spring, as Maya and Alexander walked through Pike Place Market after dinner, he stopped suddenly beside a flower vendor's stall, his attention caught by a display of simple white daisies. "My mother used to grow flowers like these in our backyard when I was a child," he said, his voice carrying a note of wistful remembrance that Maya had never heard before. "She died when I was in college, and I think I convinced myself that sentiment was weakness, that missing her was somehow unproductive." Maya took his hand, understanding that Alexander was sharing something deeply personal, a piece of his emotional history that he had kept locked away for years. "Grief isn't weakness," she said gently. "It's love, with nowhere to go." Your mother would want you to remember her with joy, not push those memories away because they hurt. Alexander bought a small bouquet of the daisies, not for Maya, but for himself, a gesture of reconciliation with the part of his heart that he had closed off in the name of business success. That night, he placed the flowers on his kitchen table and called his brother for the first time in 2 years, beginning a conversation that would eventually heal the rift that had developed between them. As summer approached, Maya made a decision that surprised even herself. Using a portion of the money Alexander had given her, she enrolled in a graduate program in library science, finally committing to the dream of opening her own bookstore that she had harbored for years but never dared to pursue seriously. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked, when she told him about her decision over dinner at their favorite quiet restaurant. "Not the graduate program, which I think is wonderful, but accepting the money. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything." Maya reached across the table to take his hand, a gesture that had become natural and necessary for both of them. "I'm not accepting it because I owe you," she said. "I'm accepting it because you believe in me, and for the first time in my life, I'm starting to believe in myself too." Alexander brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You've given me something infinitely more valuable than money," he said. "You've reminded me what it feels like to care about someone more than I care about profit margins and quarterly reports." Their relationship continued to deepen throughout the summer months, marked by quiet dinners, long walks through the city, and countless hours of conversation that revealed new layers of compatibility and affection. Alexander introduced Maya to his world gradually, bringing her to business functions where her genuine warmth and intelligence impressed his colleagues and competitors alike. Maya, in turn, helped Alexander rediscover simple pleasures that he had forgotten in his climb to the top of the corporate ladder. They spent Saturday mornings browsing farmers markets, afternoons reading in city parks, evenings watching old movies that Alexander had never taken time to see during his single-minded pursuit of success. The changes in both of them were remarkable, but not surprising to anyone who understood the transformative power of genuine love. Maya gained confidence and ambition, inspired by Alexander's belief in her potential and his practical support for her dreams. Alexander rediscovered compassion and joy, softened by Maya's unwavering integrity and her ability to see goodness in everyone she encountered. One evening in early autumn, as they sat together on Alexander's apartment balcony, overlooking Elliott Bay, Maya reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that rainy night when she had made the choice to leave an honest note on a stranger's car. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just walked away that night?" she asked, curled against Alexander's side as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Alexander tightened his arms around her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I try not to think about it," he admitted. "The idea of never meeting you, never knowing that someone like you existed in the world, it's too terrible to contemplate. I used to think that doing the right thing was its own reward," Maya said softly. "I never imagined that honesty could lead to something as wonderful as this." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that had been building in his heart for weeks. "Maya," he said, shifting so that he could look into her eyes, "I love you. I love your integrity, your kindness, your brilliant mind, and your generous heart. I love the way you see potential in every person you meet, the way you find beauty in small moments, the way you've made me remember what it means to be human instead of just successful." Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes as she heard the words she had been hoping for but hadn't dared to expect. "I love you too," she whispered. "You've shown me that I'm worth more than I ever believed, that my dreams matter, that I deserve to be loved for exactly who I am." Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, his hands trembling slightly as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was asking. "Not because you feel obligated by everything I've done for you, but because you love me enough to build a life together, because you want to wake up every morning knowing that we chose each other, that we found something real in a world full of artificial connections." Maya stared at the ring, then at Alexander's face, seeing in his eyes the same vulnerability and hope that she felt in her own heart. 6 months earlier, She had been a shy bookstore clerk, struggling to pay her bills and finish her education. Now, she was being asked to become the wife of one of Seattle's most successful businessmen, not because of what she could do for him, but because of who she was and how she had changed his understanding of what mattered in life. "Yes," she said, the word emerging as barely more than a breath. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to continue growing and changing together." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook with emotion, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted of tears and joy, and the promise of a future neither of them had imagined possible just months before. As the sun set over Seattle, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Maya Sullivan and Alexander Cross held each other close, two people who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. Their love story had begun with a scratched car and an honest note, but it had grown into something far more profound, a testament to the power of integrity, the importance of genuine connection, and the extraordinary things that could happen when someone chose to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. Maya's engagement ring caught the light of the emerging stars, a symbol of the love that had transformed them both and the future they would build together, one honest choice at a time.